The early 20th century was a time of simmering tensions in Europe. The continent was a complex web of alliances and rivalries, with each nation vying for power and influence. The political landscape was marked by a series of crises and confrontations that seemed to bring Europe closer to the brink of war with each passing year. Like a powder keg waiting for a spark, several factors contributed to the outbreak of the Great War. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 was the immediate trigger, but the underlying causes were far more complex and deep-rooted. Militarism, the belief in strong armed forces, was on the rise. European nations were increasingly investing in their military capabilities, believing that a strong military was essential for national security and prestige. This arms buildup created a climate of fear and suspicion, as nations watched each other warily, ready to mobilize at a moment's notice. Nations were locked in an arms race, building bigger armies and navies. The naval arms race between Britain and Germany, in particular, was a significant source of tension. Both nations sought to outdo each other in the construction of battleships, leading to a spiraling competition that only heightened the sense of impending conflict. Imperialism, the desire for colonies and power, fueled rivalries between European nations. The scramble for Africa and the competition for influence in Asia created friction as nations sought to expand their empires. These colonial ambitions often brought European powers into direct conflict with one another, as they vied for control of strategic territories and resources. They competed for territories in Africa and Asia, increasing tensions. The Berlin Conference of 1884–85, which regulated European colonization and trade in Africa, did little to ease these tensions. Instead, it often exacerbated them, as nations jockeyed for position and influence, leading to a series of colonial disputes and confrontations. Nationalism, a strong sense of national pride and a desire for unity, also played a role. This fervent nationalism was not limited to the major powers, it was also a potent force in the smaller nations of Europe. In the Balkans, for example, nationalist movements sought to break free from the control of empires and establish independent nation-states, adding another layer of complexity to the already volatile situation. People became fiercely loyal to their countries, creating an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust towards others. This intense national pride often translated into a willingness to go to war to defend or advance national interests. Leaders used nationalist rhetoric to rally public support, further inflaming passions and making diplomatic solutions increasingly difficult to achieve. These factors, militarism, imperialism, and nationalism, created a dangerous cocktail that made large-scale conflict almost inevitable. The intricate web of alliances and treaties meant that once one nation was drawn into conflict, others were quickly pulled in as well, leading to a war that engulfed much of the world. The Great War, as it came to be known, was a tragic culmination of these forces, reshaping the world in profound and lasting ways. The spark that ignited the powder keg came on June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated in Sarajevo, Bosnia. The assassin, Gavrilo Princip, was a Serbian nationalist. Austria-Hungary, furious over the assassination, blamed Serbia and issued an ultimatum with harsh demands. When Serbia failed to meet all of the demands, Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914. A network of alliances then drew other nations into the conflict. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the trigger, but the underlying causes of the war had been brewing for years. Europe was quickly divided into two armed camps. On one side were the Central Powers Germany, Austria-Hungary, and later the Ottoman Empire. On the other side were the Allies, Great Britain, France, Russia, and eventually Italy and Japan. Each country was bound by treaties to support their allies, turning a regional conflict into a global war. Germany, fearing a two-front war, enacted the Schlieffen Plan. This plan called for a rapid invasion of France through neutral Belgium, hoping to knock them out of the war quickly before turning their attention to Russia. The alliance system meant that a conflict between two countries quickly escalated into a war engulfing all of Europe. Section 4. Stalemate in the Trenches. A new kind of war. The First World War introduced a new kind of warfare that the world had never seen before. It was a conflict that would change the face of battle forever. Germany's advance through Belgium was halted at the Battle of the Marne in September 1914. This battle was a turning point, as it stopped the rapid German advance and set the stage for a prolonged and grueling conflict. The initial hopes for a quick victory were dashed, and both sides began to dig in for a long and brutal war. This marked the beginning of trench warfare on the Western Front. Trenches were dug to provide soldiers with protection from the relentless artillery and machine gun fire. These trenches soon became a defining feature of the war, stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss border. Both sides dug elaborate trench systems stretching for hundreds of miles across France and Belgium. These trenches were not just simple ditches, they were complex networks with multiple lines of defense, communication trenches and living quarters. The trench systems were designed to withstand the intense bombardments and to provide a strategic advantage in the stalemate that ensued. The area between the trenches, known as no man's land, was a desolate wasteland, ravaged by artillery and machine gun fire. It was a deadly zone filled with barbed wire, craters from shelling, and the remnants of failed attacks. Crossing no man's land was a near-suicidal endeavor, with soldiers facing almost certain death from enemy fire. Soldiers lived in these trenches, often for months at a time, facing disease, lice, and the constant threat of enemy attack. The conditions were horrendous, with mud, water, and the stench of death all around. Trench foot, a painful condition caused by prolonged exposure to damp and unsanitary conditions, was common. The soldiers had to endure not only the physical hardships, but also the psychological toll of constant bombardment and the ever-present danger. Life in the trenches was a miserable and terrifying experience. The soldiers faced the daily reality of death and injury, with little respite from the horrors of war. The constant noise of artillery, the fear of gas attacks, and the sight of fallen comrades took a heavy toll on their mental health. Despite the camaraderie among the soldiers, the sense of isolation and the harsh conditions made trench life almost unbearable. Trench warfare led to a stalemate on the Western Front, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The war became a war of attrition, with both sides suffering heavy casualties for minimal territorial gains. The static nature of trench warfare meant that battles were often fought over the same ground with little progress made. This stalemate would continue for years, leading to a prolonged and devastating conflict that would shape the course of history. Section 5: Bloodbath at Verdun, a battle of attrition. One of the most horrific battles of the war was the Battle of Verdun, which raged from February to December 1916. This battle was not just a clash of armies but a grueling test of endurance and willpower. The landscape of Verdun, once serene, was transformed into a nightmarish expanse of mud, blood, and barbed wire. The sheer scale of the conflict was unprecedented, with both sides committing vast numbers of troops and resources to the fight. German forces launched a massive offensive against the French fortress city of Verdun. The Germans meticulously planned their attack, believing that Verdun was the key to breaking French morale. They aimed to bleed France white by inflicting maximum casualties. The initial bombardment was one of the heaviest of the war, with millions of shells raining down on French positions. The Germans believed that by inflicting heavy casualties on the French, they could break their will to fight. The French, however, were equally determined to hold their ground. The trenches at Verdun became scenes of unimaginable horror, with soldiers enduring constant shelling, gas attacks, and hand-to-hand combat. The conditions were appalling, with mud, rats, and the ever-present threat of death. The French, determined to hold their ground, poured men and resources into the defense of Verdun. General Philippe Pétain, who later became a national hero, played a crucial role in organizing the defense. He famously declared, "They shall not pass," a phrase that became a rallying cry for the French troops. The French army rotated units in and out of the front lines to ensure that no single unit was completely decimated. The battle became a symbol of French resistance, but it came at a terrible cost. The French soldiers, known as poilus, displayed extraordinary bravery and resilience. Despite the relentless German assaults, they held their ground, turning Verdun into a fortress of defiance. The French flag flying over the ruins of Verdun became a powerful symbol of national pride and determination. Both sides suffered hundreds of thousands of casualties in the relentless fighting. The human cost was staggering, with entire units being wiped out in the brutal combat. The wounded were evacuated under harrowing conditions, and the dead were buried in mass graves. The scale of the suffering was almost unimaginable, with soldiers enduring physical and psychological trauma that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Battle of Verdun epitomized the brutality and futility of trench warfare. The once beautiful landscape was left scarred and desolate, a testament to the horrors of war. The trenches, filled with mud and barbed wire, became symbols of the stalemate that defined much of World War I. Verdun remains a poignant reminder of the immense sacrifices made by those who fought and died in one of the most grueling battles in history. Section 6 America enters the fray, turning the tide. For much of the war, the United States remained neutral. However, several factors, including German submarine attacks on American ships and the Zimmermann Telegram, a secret German proposal to Mexico, turned public opinion against Germany. In April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany and entered the war on the side of the Allies. The arrival of fresh American troops and supplies provided a much-needed boost to the Allied war effort. The entry of the United States into the war proved to be a turning point in favor of the Allies. As the war raged on, the tide slowly began to turn in favor of the Allies. The relentless pressure from combined Allied forces, bolstered by fresh American troops, began to take its toll on the Central Powers. By late 1918, the situation for Germany and its allies had become untenable. Internal strife and economic collapse weakened the German resolve. The Spanish flu pandemic further strained resources and morale. On the Western Front, the Allies launched a series of successful offensives, pushing the exhausted German forces back. Recognizing the dire circumstances, Germany sought an armistice. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the guns fell silent. The Great War, which had consumed millions of lives and reshaped the world, finally came to an end. The road to armistice was paved with immense sacrifice and unwavering determination. The world would never be the same, but the lessons learned and the memories of those who fought would endure. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content.